You're listening to Witch Wednesdays, a semi-weekly podcast source for all things witchcraft in the modern world. Join your host, Steph, on Wednesday mornings to chat about seasons, Sabbats, and all new witchcraft topics to help you make your life more magical. Welcome back to Witch Wednesdays. I'm Steph, and I have a guest here with me today that you have heard from before, but we have a brand new topic to talk about. So I'm going to turn it over to her so she can introduce herself again and let you know where you can find her online.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be back. For those who aren't familiar with my work, I am the author of Witchcraft Cocktails and Moon Magick Mixology. And then also, that's the magical mixology side of things if you like drinking with intention, but also the Modern Witchcraft book of astrology, and most recently of Moon Magick, which I'm so excited to talk about today. And I love combining intention into all the things we can do. So you can connect with me through my website, Witchcraft Cocktails, that has links to all of my mixology socials. And then JuliaHalinaHadas.com for all of the author socials, just because not everyone's interested in mixology. So I have those things separate.
And I am so excited that you created another book because I've talked about this like in your episode, but I know that I've mentioned it like on Patreon and YouTube stuff too. I'm always referring to your cocktails book. I'm like, this is one of my favorites. I always make stuff from here. And I think since the last time listeners heard from you, I just wanted to mention that I pulled that book out on Halloween. We have a big Halloween party and we hire a bartender for it because it's so much easier.
Ooh, yeah,
And
yeah.
I pulled that book out and she absolutely loved it. And then all of the guests were like picking things out of there to like make for it, like based on like not just the ingredients, but also like everything that you had to say about, you know, each one and what they were looking for, needing in their life right now. Like it was so great. It was so much fun.
I love hearing that. I love it. Yeah, that book is like, I wish some of like I could go back in time because like I was behind the bar making a lot of those recipes, and it wasn't really like a thing yet. Like people weren't interested in it. And then all of a sudden they were. And it's just like I would love to like have people come visit me at the bar and have me serve them those drinks and stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, it's such an amazing resource. So I love that. But today we are talking about your new one.
Yeah.
I was so excited to get my hands on Moon Magick, which it's a good looking book. I love the
Yeah.
way the
Yeah.
pages are, where it's like that sort of what's it called when they're not like exactly even at the edge, so it makes it look like an old timey like witchy grimoire. I love that.
I can't, I'm gonna like butcher the pronunciation, but I'm just gonna go for it. I think it's like perforated or perforate. God damn, I'm sorry.
Right?
Is that
Yeah,
how we're on this podcast?
I'm not sure what it is either, but I love that it looks like that because it really does make it look like a touch extra
Yeah.
witchy. I love that.
And I have like another extra nerdy thing. So like I am someone that like I wanted to be an author for like since I was a teen, but I was more like interested in fantasy and witchcraft at that time, but so I love to smell books. And I don't know if you smell this one, but it kind of smells like herb, like beetroot powder if you like smell the pages. I don't
Is
know if you
that
get
what it
that at
is? I
all.
know it smells different because I have it here on my
Yeah.
shelf with like other books and it smells different from other books, but I could not figure out what it was. It's
Yeah,
like,
I was
oh,
so fascinated because like when I received my books like a little bit earlier, not that much earlier though, because Adams Media does things on a crazy fast timeline. And I was like, is this just the books that I received? But then like we went into a couple stores that had the book out early. They all, yeah, I don't know what it is, but it reminds me of beetroot powder because I use that in the Pink Moon powder blush recipe. And just beets are very Polish. My family's Polish. So I'm just like, it smells kind of like that earthy beet root kind of vibe to me, but it could be anything. I don't know what it is.
it is an earthy smell. And I noticed that because I was like, oh, maybe it is like where it came from. Because, if you go into like a witchcraft store and you buy books and bring them home, they smell incense,
Yes.
like they're heavily
Yes.
incensed and like it just takes a while for the smell to fade. And I was like, oh, maybe it's just like, from the shipping and like where it came from. But no, I'm smelling it right now. And it definitely is an
Yeah.
earthy smell, like very witchy.
It's so funny. It must be something they use like in the pages or the ink. But I love it. I love that it has like this fun little thing to it because I'm such a nerd about how the way books smell. So
Yeah, that is such a fun touch. I really just had a great time with that. Um,
yeah.
and I was excited that you were coming out with another book. So let's start with that. How did you, I know you wanted to be an author for a long time, but how did you then go from the cocktails and then decide like Moon Magick would be the next,
Yeah.
route to go
You
down?
know, yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things, like once you're on the other side of like the publishing industry, once you're in the publishing world, or at least like working with, I think books are a little different, which is the beauty of that, the way that market is growing and having that flexibility. When you're working with publishers, there's a lot of confinements, which it can be a good thing, like having experienced people guide you as to, yes, you can write like, hundreds of thousands of words, but the reality is not everyone's going to read that. And so I already had my Moon Magic mixology book, but I was kind of limited in the ways that I could talk about both the Moon Magic part and the mixology. And so this was like a great opportunity for me to dive more specifically into the Moon Magic part of the basis for, I mean, all of my recipes on my blog, are just totally inspired by working with the moon energy through libation. And so it was nice to focus in on kind of the root of that, of all of the ways that you can work with the moon, our intrinsic connection to the moon, the astrology aspects of the signs, the phases, special lunar events, all those things, and focus in on the ritual and magic part of that. So I kind of like having like these two separate resources now of like, here's the mixology side of that. And then here's like, the basis of that energy.
And I think it was a great way to do things because there's so much detail in this book. And I
Yeah.
have other like lunar witchcraft or moon magic books, and they sometimes heavily focus on like the moon in a certain sign. And I know that you
Yeah.
have that in here, but I love that you also have like what the moon during Samhain means and like all the different Sabbats are in there. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, this is new and different. I like it.
Yeah, I love that. That's one thing I always do when, the way the publishers work, they have certain titles that they do want to put out. And I always I want to add something new if I can, because what's the point of putting out there's already a great resource on that, I don't need to put that out unless I'm going to be adding something new. And so the seasons were a really big aspect of that because I think we kind of forget the moon's connection to the seasons. Like we all know about like, oh, the June strawberry moon, right? Or the pink moon, right? We know those like catchy monthly moon names. But the reality is that the moon doesn't line up to the month. The moon's connotation and meaning in a whole lunar cycle and where those full moon names comes from a seasonal moon practice and worship. And it's just the moon is so tied to our seasons. Like the moon helps steady, the flow of our seasons, or else we would be just they'd be so much faster for us to experience. So anyway, I'm getting so nerdy and excited. You can probably tell. But anyway, so I loved to really dive into that, especially because we would practice a lot of those Sabbats around those seasonal lunar vibrations or energies. So I was really excited to focus in on that and kind of like, if you're someone who practices seasonal witchcraft and that's most tangible to you, here's how you can incorporate the moon because the moon is connected to that in a way that doesn't feel so like, oh, I have to look up what exact sign the moon is in, or I have to look up the exact month that the moon is in. You can look at it through a seasonal lens.
I think that's so helpful because the seasons are so obviously focused on the sun and what the sun is doing in the sky, where is it all?
Yeah.
And we sometimes forget what a big part the moon plays in all of that and the way that they can like work together and still be
Yeah.
part of your practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I really appreciate all the spells and rituals that you put in here because sometimes we don't do that. And some books are like solely academic, and then some are solely like spells and rituals, and you get the best of the both worlds here.
Yeah, and my problem is like I don't know if it's ADHD. I mean, I know I have that, but it's just like I have too many things that I want to do, in my works. And so I really wanted to like give a lot of options of spells, like the foundational moon magic, but also at the same time, I wanted to have the flexibility that people could modify the spell. So I have the appendix in the back that like here, yes, I use these herbs in this spell, but if you want, you can swap it for the moon in this sign, or you can it resonate best with you in whatever way. So I always try and like give a wide range of like not just spells and rituals, but also reflections and also maybe crafts, like certain things that you might do and how do it in a way that you can modify it to make it work for you.
And speaking of your appendix in the back, the it's like 4 pages, but the moon spells by intention is like the greatest way to organize a spell book. It like makes me so happy because that's always what I'm trying to do when I am looking through a spell book and marking things, and you like summarize it all in the back there. And listeners, just so you like know what I'm talking about, she literally has a list where it goes by the different spells, you know, abundance and prosperity, banishing, all the way through. And then it says exactly which spells are included in the book that you could try. So like communication says the social butterfly body glitter, the bluebird communication spell, the lunar lip scrub. I'm like, this is brilliant. The way to be organized. It makes my heart so happy.
No, I love that. The only thing I have to say is like for me, I wish that I like this could have been like organized to be a little like because you know like the page numbers right after, but there's just we couldn't do that. So it's like there's the name of the spells, and then you can look in the index and find the actual page that it's on. But yeah, I was just like, what are the ways that people like to do things? Because we have like already the spells organized by moon sign, the phases, the seasons. And so, okay, well, regardless of that, like tuning into your inner moon, what is it that you know you want to work on at this time? You know, your inner intuition guiding you there, then you're going to know kind of what intention you want. And maybe those other things don't matter. So I wanted to like include an extra reference so that just all the things, you know, that no matter what kind of moon magic you're looking to do, you can like find some options that work best.
I really appreciate it because it's, you know, I can then sort of focus and figure out what it is that I actually need a spell for right now, what's like bothering me, what I need to work on, and then find that and then go see like what all of those different options are
Yeah.
and find what like best fits that particular moon phase or what I'm feeling like I want to do. And then I appreciate that under each one, you also have like the best timing. So like it's not strictly like this is Capricorn and only Capricorn. It's
Yes.
also you could do a Taurus or Virgo. Like you have so many different options for that.
Yes, I'm so glad you noticed that. Sorry, that's something I love to do in all my spell work because like people are like they get worried they have to do things at this exact moment and like sure it's great if you do it at that time, but if not, here's other great timings that also will help boost the spell as well. You know, so giving some flexibility for everyone.
Right. Because if it's like, oh, full moon in Capricorn, I'm like, well, I missed it. And now I'm gonna have to
Yeah.
like wait however many months until it comes back around. And it's like, oh, well, I can't do that one then. And you sort of forget about it. But this is like so many options and doesn't, you know, limit yourself.
I love that you're excited about that. I have to say that the other side of that is like, you know, sometimes I feel like I put a little too much in my books for people. So
Yeah,
it's definitely a balance. Yeah.
I'm sure it is, but as somebody that, you know, reads a lot of witchcraft books and loves organization, it just all of it made me so happy. I was like, yes, this is all of the different
Yay.
things that I want when I'm like looking in a book because I want like the index, I want things to be easy to find. I want bibliographies. You have no idea how many like don't have one.
Oh
Um,
my God, really?
yeah, there's so many. And they're like,
Wow.
I do the extended like book reviews over on Patreon and YouTube. And I always am like, I'm like, can't give it, you know, full stars. I always have to take a star off for not having the bibliography in the back. Like that's a good thing.
Wow.
So I am particularly detailed when I'm reading these books. So yours passed all the tests. It made me very happy.
It's just funny for me because like I have a degree in English and so it's like, you know, cite your sources or like proper research, you know. So like I didn't even I need to look at more bibliographies in the books that I read. I guess it never really occurred to me. I just assumed people kind of did it. So
Yeah, sometimes when you like already know the information, it doesn't like occur to you to
yeah.
like search for it. You're like, oh yeah, this makes sense. Like I already know it. But I think for beginners, it's really helpful to have that to like go back to and find additional reading and resources.
Yeah, and I also love the research part too because I was able to find like my other degree is like anthropology. I know it's a I'm all over the place, like I said,
Love it.
ADHD. But it's just like I love like doing certain research and finding like the most current studies for certain things. So like one thing that ended up happening in chapter one thing how the moon's light affects animals, right? So how the moon phases influences animal behavior. That I love diving into more specific research, like with the wildebeest and lions. You know, in chapter one, I dive into that. But also, then there was like a more recent study that came out that actually showed that I think it was, oh, sorry, it's been so long since I write this book. And like I enter into a portal and sometimes I forget what I put into to what I write, you know, like I have to like remember. But there's direct correlations from like 40,000 years ago of of our ancient ancestors, writing down the moon cycles and animal behavior that correlates to that. And they were able to detect from like what kind of symbol they wrote, how it coincided with animal behavior. So just like all the ways that it shows that we've been like really, we all know it, right? But like science sometimes needs to like find that physical evidence, and finding that more recent research that just came out through Cambridge recently, showcasing like, yes, these markings do correlate directly to the seasonal moons and what animals were doing at that time, and tracking that. So I just love finding those like more recent research things for, these little witchcraft books.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's like a brilliant way to go about it, because it is something we all know. We have like a lot of myths and legends, like, oh, the werewolves are out in the full moon. Like, well, what were wolves doing on the full moon? Like, where did that come from? That obviously,
Yeah.
that those ideas sparked from someplace. And I just love to see how all of that interplays into what we know today.
Yeah. And I just love the hippie of it all. Like, the way that moon like is connected to our evolution, and the evolution of life on Earth. Because I think we on modern day, like science tends to disregard it, but I think they're diving more into like researching circulunar rhythm rather than just our circadian rhythm, but how the moon cycle affects human behavior too. And so it's kind of like catching up in that way of like, yes, the moon on one side did play a part in our evolution, but also it still continues to impact us. It's just that is much more subtle and nuanced than we might think.
And even in ways that we might not totally notice until you start
Yeah.
paying attention. And then once you do, you can't miss it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anyway, so that's just the nerdy
I I
chapter
I
one stuff.
love all the nerdy stuff, because I don't, there are like some months where I like follow the moon really closely, and then other months where I'm like not paying attention at all. But my sister-in-law is a emergency room nurse, and she knows when the full moon is. She's very aware, and she's not a witch at all, but she's like, I know, because I know exactly
Yeah.
how the emergency room reacts. I'm like, that's hilarious that you have this anecdotal evidence that that is a real thing.
Yeah, it very much is. Yeah.
So, out of all of the spells and rituals, do you have any particular favorites that stick out to you, or do you have any that you sort of like are regularly doing in your own practice?
Yeah, so I think the one that I most read, sorry, I have the book right in front of me. So if you hear me flipping through the book, because I put way too many spells in this, we had to cut like 10,000 words. And so
Oh
I had to
no,
cut like,
not the best.
yeah, I know that's like my problem, right? It's just, you have limits as to what they can, afford to do, the cost of putting a book together. So I had to cut a lot of spells out. But the intention setting candle blessing is something I usually do for like every new moon. Especially if I'm just low energy, I think that's one thing I've really been adapting into my witchcraft practice, is like it's really great to do all of these grand rituals, but also like I'm living in the modern, city life, and things are busy, and I have to find ways to integrate practice in things that I already do. So that's like the pink moon blush, and stuff, things that I use or do already. How can I infuse that with like my moon magic? So the intention candle spell from that moon phase section is one I always do. But then also some of my favorites, like I love the lunar lip scrub. I actually use that like as my face scrub, but you need to be careful because of the peppermint essential oil. But I love using that on my lips. I have the bluebird. Is it called bluebird? Sorry, I have to change the name sometimes for this spell. What was it? The body glitter spell, the social butterfly. Like I love to use that, especially and times like now, Mercury retrograde and podcast recordings when I need to like work on my enunciation. All of the things really like, oh, here's another one I love to do is the waning crescent cleansing candle spell. It's listed under the Aquarius moon section. But you can do that anytime during the waning part of the cycle. And I love to use that for cleansing my energy and also cleansing the energy around my house. So yeah, those are just a couple of my favorites, but I usually like use all of them in different ways.
I think listeners will know just by what you said, but just, as a reminder, there are so many different options. So you have like the things that you can use in skincare. You have candle spells, you have divination, you have spells that invoke different goddesses. So there's
Yes.
something for everybody in here, really.
Yeah, and I love the Nana guided meditation, especially with like the lapis lazuli, because lapis lazuli, like when I first started getting into all this stuff, like whenever I would want to manifest something, I would work with lapis lazuli. And so incorporating that into, and also like kind of the hippie thing there is that comes from like my mixology side. Because a lot of times in my witchcraft and moon magic mixology books, I talk about it of like how in ancient Sumeria, they had the beer goddess Ninkasi, and beer was, or, the substances were a way to connect to their moon god Nana because he was, overseeing agriculture and things coming to harvest, which would then, lead to fermentation. Anyway, so I would just love that little lapis lazuli connection with his beard being made out of lapis lazuli. And anyway, so that was just another thing that I love to do from the book.
I love that. I love that there's so many like little details that are included in each one.
Yeah, yeah. I just wish I could write a little less sometimes. I'm like, oh, there's so much backstory for every spell, and I have to like fine tune to not overwhelm people because I'm just all over the place sometimes.
No, I like that. I have so many marked that I want to try. I was like, oh, I could use this. I could use this. I did already make the lemon cleansing solution because I did a whole spring clean
Yes.
and that was perfect. I was like, yes, this is exactly what I
Yeah.
need. So that turned out excellent.
Yeah, I love working with that, especially just because like, I'm modern living, you gotta like use what you can sometimes, but also like try and make natural products when I can just to reduce the amount of chemicals in my environment. So I loved working that, especially with the Virgo energy kind of that solution for Virgo moon cleanse. Anyway, so yeah, I love that one too.
Do you have any tips or advice for somebody that is like maybe listening to this and they are either brand new to moon magic or they've only ever like put their crystals out on the full moon and then like called it a day and are wanting to dive in? Do you have any tips and advice of like where they should start or some things that they should do to keep from getting overwhelmed? Because like once you dive in, there's
Yes.
so many moon cycles, there's so many, signs that the moon could be in, there's so many different seasons, like it gets overwhelming quickly.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing I hear a lot too, because especially like when it goes to like the new moon versus full moon lore, there's like so much different beliefs, so many different beliefs around that. And I think the key thing is really kind of tuning into what the moon represents, right? It's connected to our subconscious, our dreams, our inner intuition and sense of feeling and our emotions. And when I say emotions, like I think we tend to really simplify what emotions mean. Oftentimes, I find our emotional landscape is connected to our sense of how we feel about life, intuition and deeper healing. And so when you kind of take away everything else that you can think about, moon magic, right? What sign the moon is in, the seasons, the phase, etc. The moon is your intuitive aspects of yourself, your sense of inner feeling. And so lean into noticing how the moon impacts you, where you are in your life, and just tuning into your inner moon, your inner intuition and subconscious. One thing that I like to do from the book is the full moon reading. In is it chapter 7 or what spell was that? Sorry, one second. And the reason why I like that one in particular is because regardless of what other moon information is going on, that card reading really asks you to tune into what that lunar cycle represents for you, what themes are coming up for you, and tuning into more of your personal life and intuitive sense and putting aside all of the extras that you can get into if you want, but really just tuning into your inner feeling. Like basically, to summarize all of that and working with the moon, kind of begin to notice how you personally feel. If you're aware of what phase the moon is in, if it's a full moon or new moon, just take the time to reflect on what's happening in your life. What have you noticed over that lunar cycle? What is calling to be healed at that time for you? And tune into that. That's really like the easiest way to start and lean into your personal relationship with the moon in that way.
I think that's great advice because I know, even myself, when I can easily get myself overwhelmed. even though
Yeah.
I, read the book and I know the information and I've been doing moon magic for a while, I too can fall into that trap where I'm like, okay, but it's a waxing crescent, but it's also in Virgo and it's also, like there's so many things that you can
Yeah.
put together and layer. But like at some point, I'm like, okay, I'm just confusing myself and I'm like really overwhelmed and I need to just take a step back and get back to the basics. So that really makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing, like I said, like, a lot of us are just trying to survive in today's day and age. And like it's so easy to like look at all of the things, especially when you get really in depth into astrology. There's just like so many layers to it. But at the end of the day, you've got to do what works best for you consistently. And oftentimes it's just tuning into yourself, tuning into your feelings, meditating, visualizing the moon and what that symbolizes for you, and like taking away all those extras can be a really good thing because we all have a personal connection with the moon. And so leaning into that sometimes is a better way to start, but also a great way to stay consistent in your moon magic practice.
I think a lot of people do focus like more on their sun sign and lean into that
Oh
rather
yeah.
than like acknowledging their moon sign. I try to, be equal, but I do like I personally resonate more with my sun sign. But I'm trying to embrace my moon. I'm a Libra moon.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, my Venus is in Libra. But I'm actually I connect less with my sun sign. I shouldn't say I connect less, but I really resonate more with my rising and my moon. So my rising is in Aquarius and my moon sign is in Pisces. And my sun is in Leo. So I'm just giving people my main three. My big and so I think the Leo is very obvious. Like it comes across when I'm doing anything performative. Like I used to be in a rock cover band.
That's a
And
Leo.
yeah, and that's just like the Leo stuff. Like the Leo's here present in speaking, like and teaching and education and all that stuff. But the Aquarius and the Pisces part of me, I really resonate with that those parts of myself, especially the Pisces moon, like that intuitive aspect of just spirituality and feeling. And I think that's also why I tend to be more adaptive in my practice, especially with moon magic, is because just kind of going with the flow, rather than trying to push things or force things, tune more into that spiritual energy. But yeah.
I could definitely see that. That makes sense for your personality and the way that you wrote your book.
Yeah. And also like the Aquarius rising in me hates to be labeled, especially because like with the Leo being like so obvious and very easy to label Leo traits and stuff, like my little Aquarius rising self is like I like to be a little more um effervescent and not effervescent. I'm using that word wrongly recently. I've kind of realized the amount of times I want to use that word anyway. But I just like to be a little more fluid, and I kind of like hate the labels and stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like an Aquarius for sure.
Yeah.
I love it. I sort of tabbed all of the things that were like Libra moon related because I just want to get to know it a little better.
Yeah.
And just see how I can like maybe work with that side a little bit more and that energy a little bit more. Because I definitely do lean more into my other two, which is Scorpio and Sagittarius. And I lean towards those like quite a bit more. And sort
Wait,
of
so which one's
explore
your
that.
rising and which one's your, oh, sorry, which one's your rising? Which one's your sun?
I am Scorpio sun and Sagittarius rising.
Cool. And like, how do you feel like, your Libra moon affects you?
I want to say, as far as like my inner mindset, like my own like personal like emotions and feelings are much more like thought out and balanced than a typical Scorpio. Because I always like hear that about like Scorpio sun signs that were like so emotional, like water signs. And I personally feel like I'm a little bit more balanced, and at least like when I don't have like outbursts or anything, like I'm if something's like bothering me, I like sit quietly and think about it and like weigh out all of my options. And I feel like that's a very Libra tendency
Yeah.
of me to just like
Yeah.
sit like Libra moon, definitely to just like sit quietly, like in the dark and think about all of the things that are going on and weigh out the best option and weigh out all of my different feelings and like balance what's going on. So I definitely see it present that way. But it is something that I want to like connect with more because it does like reflect sort of my inner self and my inner feelings. And I need to learn more
Yeah.
about that.
I love that. I love hearing that because everything you're saying, like, so true. And also, I was just thinking about earlier how you were like looking at, like, you're saying you can get really into the waxing crescent, but then, oh, also the waxing crescent inside. And then just it kind of reminds me of, like, like Libra who wants to like see all the sides and like balance all the perspectives and like how that also kind of like leads to like indecision, with your magic practice. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that is probably the case with a lot, like not even just moon magic, but a lot of things when I'm like learning something new. I'm like, I want to learn everything and be able to apply it perfectly before I like make a decision of what to do, which
Yeah.
of course stops me in my tracks. It's so bad to behave that way. Because then I end
Yeah.
up doing nothing.
I feel that.
So yeah, there's some Libra indecisiveness right there. I'm like, well, if I can't be, I think it's like Libra and Scorpio together. Like if it can't be perfect, it's not worth doing it all. And that's such a bad mindset.
Yeah, it's a Scorpio diving deep, getting to the heart
Yep.
of it. I love it.
Yep. And I know when people say like astrology, isn't real and these things don't, always like reflect. I think they're like focused on the sun sign. They might not, understand that you have a whole chart that dictates your personality and it's always
Yeah. And it's so complicated, because it's also like the angles that everything makes with each other, right? So there's so many layers to it. And I think the thing too with astrology is also it's just a spirituality. It's has a lot of like history and backing to it, but it's I think for me, especially with my moon, like looking at the moon and the signs and stuff, is just that spiritual energy, opportunities for reflection and healing and getting to know yourself better, but astrology can be so validating when you find, the right information or the right, your chart.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense and answer some questions, but then also like give guidance on the way that you work best. So from my chart, I learned, how I work best in a business environment, how I study best, like all of those things are in your
Yes.
chart. And so I like learned all of those and I was like, oh, I'm finally not beating my head against a wall, trying all these systems that work for other people and not for me.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. Sometimes I find astrology is also just a little too on the nose. Like my Saturn return happened and then my dad died that year. So it's just like sometimes it's a little too direct.
Yeah, I've had that happen too. That one was my Chinese zodiac. I am year of the rat. And there are
Mm.
some superstitions that if it's your year that comes back around, that it's going to be a bad year for you. And I was 2020. So that
Oh
was
my
super, and that
God.
is also the year my
Whew.
dad died. So that was just a super
Oh my God.
excellent
Oh,
year. So it was like, oh, so now I believe in the Chinese zodiac as well, and I need to study that
yeah.
more because that was accurate. So that was wrong.
Oh God, that's a lot. I'm sorry. That's 2020 was a terrible year in general, but that's like even
Yeah, it
whew.
was just so yeah, these things happen and they're like not necessarily predicted. You can't predict everything that is going to happen in your life, but it's good to be aware and know that these things
Yeah.
exist.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I know we got a little off topic, but I loved that. That was like
No,
I
I
was
mean,
like,
it's slightly off topic, but goes right back into all of
yeah.
the moon magic and all of the different spells that you can use to help and how to get to know your various signs and use when the moon is in those various signs to learn more about yourself and your inner life. I think it's great.
Yeah, and also just like the moon's meaning in astrology, like because another thing that I do is I need to like narrow myself in a little bit. I'm too all over the place, but like energy work. And the thing with the moon in astrology is one aspect that it really correlates to is kind of like your childhood life or your home, right? And how you were raised and how that influences how you like to nurture others or how you like to be nurtured. And there's just so much healing potential when you really look into that. And healing those patterns. The moon can be really potent for that. And also, we obviously use the moon for manifestation, but also just on that level of like healing. Sometimes we're a little blocked because of our perspectives. And so going back and looking at the root of that through working with the moon and healing those patterns can be really potent to help open roads to new possibilities.
100%. That is something that I am working on because I am a Scorpio that was raised by a Capricorn and a Virgo. So there was no emotional nurturing that went on.
Oh no,
That was
that's funny.
that was a rough one. So yeah, we're just working on all of those things and like working on myself to realize like where that sort of came from.
Yes.
And then make some changes on that front. Because my husband's a Cancer, so there's all kinds of emotional nurturing that has to
Oh
happen.
my God, that's
So
so
like,
funny. I love it.
using the moon magic to unlearn old patterns and embrace new things. So that's sort of what
Yeah.
this book has been guiding me on in the last 2 weeks.
Oh, I love that. If this book does anything like that, then that's really my goal, I think.
I think it's a really wonderful resource, and I appreciate you taking the time today to chat all about it and share so many like stories and different ways to use this book because, like I said, I know a lot of beginners can look at something like this and think that it's too much and it's not for them and it's like too much studying, but it's really not.
Yeah, just take it at your own pace, look at what you're interested in, and don't get too overwhelmed because there's a lot of information out there. And at the end of the day, tune into your inner moon, tune into your inner sense of feeling and intuition to help kind of guide the way.
And like I mentioned in talking about the different indexes in the back, like this is really helpful for hand holding that you can just flip to the back and be like, what do I need a spell for? What's the moon phase in right now? Okay, it's in Libra. What can I do for Libra? What does
Yeah.
this correspond with? Like it's just listed out there for you. And I think that's so helpful to have in a guide like this, even as I wouldn't
Yay.
consider myself a beginner in this. And I still am like flipping to the back and like finding it so helpful to have it organized that way. So I think it's like a
Yay.
great guide for both beginners and advanced practitioners alike to have on your shelf.
Thank you so much. Honestly, it makes me happy to hear that because you just never know, like, when you've been writing all those months and then finally goes out into the world, like hearing that is very validating. So I'm glad it came across in the way that I intended.
Well, I appreciate you creating the guide and I appreciate you spending the time today. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And listeners, as always, I will have everything linked in the show notes so you can check out not only the book, but like Julia mentioned, all of her different resources, online websites, and social media. So you could go check her out and check out the brand new book and hopefully also the cocktail books as well, because those are my favorite. But that is everything that I have for you this week. I will see you all next week. Need even more witchcraft in your life? Subscribe to Witch Wednesdays on Patreon and YouTube for all types of exclusive bonus content like spells, recipes, book reviews, and more, or even order personalized tarot readings and spells. Be sure to follow on Instagram at Witch Wednesdays Podcast. And you can find all these links and more at witchwednesdays.com.